The mountains do not care about your plans. They do not care about your faith, your family, or the tiny, fragile life of a child. People think the wilderness is a playground, a place to find themselves among the swaying pines and the cold, crystalline streams. But I have spent too many years looking into the gray spaces where people simply cease to be. I have seen the way the light dies behind the eyes of a father who realizes the woods have swallowed his blood. We are back in the Big Thompson Canyon, Colorado. It is October 2nd, 1999. The air has that brittle metallic edge to it, the kind of cold that promises an early winter. It is a Saturday. A group of 11 adults, members of a Christian singles group, are gathered at the Poudre River Resort. They are there for fellowship, for a hike into the Comanche Peaks wilderness. Among them is a 3-year-old boy named Jaryd Atadero. He is wearing a blue fleece pullover, blue sweatpants, and a pair of sturdy little sneakers. He is a bundle of energy, a small spark of heat in a landscape that is slowly turning to ice. The trail they chose was the Big South Trail. It follows the river snaking through a canyon where the walls are steep and the granite is slick with ancient moss. The group started their trek around 10 in the morning. Jaryd was doing what 3-year-olds do. He was running ahead then, doubling back, his small feet crunching on the fallen needles and the dry skeletal leaves. The adults were talking, their voices echoing off the rock faces lost in the roar of the water. There is a specific kind of complacency that happens in a group. Everyone thinks someone else is watching. Everyone assumes the circle is closed. But the wilderness is full of gaps. It is full of moments where the veil between here and nowhere becomes paper thin. Jaryd was about 50 to 100 yards ahead of the main group. He was interacting with 2 other hikers they encountered on the trail. He asked them if there were bears in the woods. They smiled, told him no, and watched as he ran back toward his group. That was the last time a human being saw Jaryd Atadero alive. One moment he was there, a blue speck against the brown and gray of the trail. The next there was only the sound of the wind whistling through the ponderosa pines. It happened in a matter of seconds. No scream. No sound of a struggle. No frantic splashing in the river. Just a sudden, absolute silence that settled over the trail like a heavy shroud. When the group realized Jaryd was no longer in sight, the atmosphere changed instantly. The casual chatter died. The air suddenly felt thinner, colder. They began to call his name. Jaryd. Jaryd. The name bounced off the canyon walls, returning to them as a hollow mockery. They searched the immediate area, checking behind boulders and under the low-hanging branches of the fir trees. Nothing. No blue fleece. No small footprints in the dirt. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and pulled him into the dark. By the time the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks, the search was in full swing. This was not a casual effort. Over the next several days, hundreds of searchers would descend on the Big South Trail. We are talking about professional mountain rescue teams, helicopters with thermal imaging, and dozens of volunteers. They combed every square inch of that canyon. They looked in the river, thinking perhaps he had fallen in and been swept away by the current. But the river was shallow in places, and divers found nothing. They brought in bloodhounds. This is where the story takes its first turn into the unsettling. The dogs, highly trained animals capable of tracking a scent through rain and mud, could not find a single trace of the boy. They paced back and forth on the trail where he was last seen whining and circling, but they never picked up a trail. It was as if his scent had been erased from the physical world. The weather turned. A storm rolled in, coating the mountains in a layer of white, suffocating snow. The search was called off. The father, Jaryd Atadero, was left with a hole in his life that nothing could fill. He spent years wondering if his son had been abducted, if someone had snatched him off that trail in the few seconds he was out of sight. But there were no strange vehicles. No suspicious characters seen entering or leaving the trailhead. Just a boy and the mountain. The case went cold. The files sat in a drawer gathering dust while the seasons bled into one another. 4 years passed. 4 years of silence. 4 years of the mountain holding on to its secret. Then in May of 2003, 2 hikers were walking off trail high above the Big South Trail. They were nearly 500 feet up a steep, treacherous slope. This was a place no 3-year-old could have reached on his own. It was a vertical scramble, a path filled with loose scree and jagged rock. There, in the middle of a clearing, they found a single shoe. A small, sturdy sneaker. Near it was a scrap of blue fabric. When investigators arrived, they found more. They found a small skull fragment and a single tooth. The clothing was not scattered. The sweatshirt was found inside out but otherwise intact. There was no blood. There were no signs that the clothes had been ripped or shredded by the teeth of a predator. The shoes were in remarkably good condition for having sat on a mountainside for nearly 4 years. And then there was the physical location. To get to that spot, a 3-year-old would have had to climb a near vertical incline through dense brush and over massive boulders, all while remaining completely silent and unseen by the hundreds of searchers below. It is a physical impossibility. A child of that age does not have the lung capacity or the physical strength to make that ascent, especially not in the time frame between his disappearance and the arrival of the search teams. The official theory is that a mountain lion took him. They say a big cat could have snatched him silently and carried him up the mountain to its den. But there are problems with that narrative. A mountain lion kills with a bite to the neck. It leaves blood. It drags its prey, leaving a trail of broken branches and disturbed earth. When a lion feeds, it shreds the clothing of its victim. Jaryd's clothing was not shredded. His skull fragment showed no sign of being crushed by the powerful jaws of a feline. And why was the sweatshirt inside out? A lion does not undress its prey before it eats. There is a clinical, almost surgical neatness to the way the remains were found that does not fit the profile of a wild animal attack. It feels more like something was placed there, like a macabre display set out for someone to find years after the fact. I have looked at hundreds of these cases. There is a pattern that emerges, a chilling consistency that defies conventional logic. The silent disappearance. The failure of tracking dogs. The discovery of remains in a location that is geographically impossible for the victim to have reached. The missing shoes, or the clothing found in a state that suggests they were removed by hands, not teeth. We are left looking into the shadows, wondering what kind of predator possesses that kind of intelligence and that kind of stealth. Is it something we haven't classified? Something that moves through the woods with a different set of physical laws? The Comanche peaks are old. They have seen civilizations rise and fall. They have watched the slow crawl of glaciers and the fast, frantic lives of humans. They know things we have forgotten. Jaryd Atadero was a little boy who wanted to see a bear. He wanted to run ahead and be the leader of the pack. He took one step too far into the green silence, and he became a ghost. The mountain eventually gave back a piece of him, a tiny fragment of bone to satisfy the legal requirements of death, but it kept the rest. It kept the truth. Every time I walk into the woods, now I feel it. That heavy, watchful presence. The sense that the trees are not just trees and the wind is not just air. There is something out there that operates in the gaps of our perception. It waits for the moment you turn your head. It waits for the moment the group loses focus. And then it reaches out. The tragedy of Jaryd Atadero is not an isolated incident. It mirrors the disappearance of Dennis Martin in the Great Smoky Mountains in 1969. A 7-year-old boy who vanished during a game of hide-and-seek, never to be seen again despite one of the largest search efforts in United States history. Or the case of young Casey Hathaway, who disappeared in the North Carolina woods and claimed he was protected by a bear until he was found in an area that had been searched multiple times. These stories all share the same DNA. They all point toward a predator that we are not prepared to face. A predator that doesn't just kill but erases. We are left with the cold comfort of a closed case, and the lingering, visceral fear that the wilderness is not a sanctuary. It is a hunting ground, and we are the ones being watched. The air in this office smells of stale coffee and the metallic tang of old filing cabinets that have not been opened in 3 decades. I sit here surrounded by the paper remains of lives cut short, staring at the grainy photographs of mountain passes that look more like jagged teeth than landscape. It is 3 in the morning, and the hum of the fluorescent light above me sounds like a swarm of insects trapped in glass. Every time I revisit the disappearance of Jaryd Atadero, I feel a cold draft on the back of my neck that has nothing to do with the ventilation. We are talking about a 3-year-old boy who vanished in the space of a heartbeat on a trail in the Roosevelt National Forest. He was there chirping about seeing a bear, and then he was gone. Not just gone in the sense of being lost, but erased from the physical world. The search that followed was a frantic, desperate collision of man against the indifferent cruelty of the peaks. They brought in the bloodhounds, the helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers who combed through the brush until their hands bled. But the dogs did not bark. They did not pull at their leashes with the frantic energy of a hunter who has found the scent. They sat down. They whined. They looked at their handlers with a profound, primitive terror in their eyes that no one wanted to acknowledge. It is as if the scent of the boy had not just dissipated but had been folded out of existence. The mountains do not just hide people. They swallow them whole and wait for the seasons to digest the memory. 4 years passed before the mountain decided to spit back a fragment of the truth. In June of 2003, 2 hikers stumbled upon a site high above the trail where Jaryd had last been seen. This was not a place a 3-year-old could reach on his own. We are talking about an elevation gain that would challenge a seasoned athlete, a vertical scramble over loose scree and jagged granite. And there, lying in the dirt, were his clothes. A pair of pants, a jacket, and his tiny sneakers. They were not scattered by the wind or torn to shreds by the frantic claws of a mountain lion. They were placed. When you look at the forensic reports, the details start to itch at the back of your brain like a splinter you cannot reach. The jacket was found inside out. Think about that for a moment. A predator does not undress its prey with the careful, methodical precision required to pull sleeves through themselves. A mountain lion or a bear would have left a crime scene of biological chaos. There would be blood spray on the lichen tufts of hair caught in the bark, and the violent signature of a struggle. Instead, there was a clinical, eerie stillness. The clothing was remarkably well preserved, despite the 4 years of snow and sun. It looked as if it had been laid out by someone who wanted it to be found, a macabre message left on a high altar of stone. I have spent thousands of hours staring at the microscopic details of these cases, and the pattern is always there, lurking just beneath the surface of the official narrative. There is a specific type of silence that falls over these areas. Witnesses often describe it as the Oz effect. The birds stop singing. The wind dies down to a dead calm. The very air feels heavy, like it has been pressurized by an unseen force. It is in these pockets of absolute silence that people vanish. Jaryd was only a few yards away from the group. He was within earshot, yet no one heard a scream. No one heard the brush break. No one heard the heavy breathing of a predator. He simply stepped into a shadow, and the shadow didn't let him back out. The physical remains were even more unsettling. They found a single tooth and a small fragment of a skull. That was it. Out of an entire human body, the mountain only gave back enough to fill a matchbox. The lack of other bones suggests something highly selective. It suggests a process that does not belong to the natural world we think we understand. If you leave a carcass in the woods, the scavengers will spread the bones over a wide radius. You find femurs, ribs, and vertebrae. But with Jaryd, it was as if the rest of him had been transported elsewhere, leaving only a token for the recovery teams to find. It felt like a legal settlement with the void. We have to ask ourselves what kind of entity operates with this level of stealth and surgical intent. There are theories that drift into the realm of the impossible because the possible has failed us. Some speak of ancient things that live in the deep caves, things that have learned to mimic the sounds of the forest to lure the unwary. Others whisper about tears in the fabric of our reality places, where the geography shifts and the trail you are on is no longer the trail you started. When you are out there in the Comanche peaks and the sun starts to dip behind the jagged horizon, you can feel the weight of those theories. You feel the eyes of something that does not have a name in our biology books. The shoes are the detail that keeps me awake when the house is quiet. Jaryd's sneakers were found with the laces still tied. If a child is dragged out of his shoes, the heels are crushed, the laces are snapped, or the shoes are found far apart. These were sitting together. It implies that the feet were removed from the shoes without disturbing the knots. The level of dexterity required for such an act is not found in the paws of a grizzly. It requires fingers. It requires a calm, terrifying patience. It suggests that while the search teams were screaming his name into the valleys below, something was sitting in the high rocks, meticulously disassembling a little boy. I often think about Jaryd Atadero, Jaryd's father. He has lived with this ghost for decades. He has climbed those mountains more times than he can count, looking for an answer that the universe refuses to provide. He was told for years that his son was probably taken by a mountain lion. But Alan knew. He saw the clothes. He saw the way they were positioned. He knew that nature is messy, but what happened to Jaryd was clean. It was a theft. Someone or something stole the boy, and then years later returned the packaging. It is a level of psychological cruelty that suggests a malicious intelligence. This is the part of the job that wears you down to the marrow. You start to see the woods not as a place of recreation, but as a vast green laboratory where we are the specimens. We walk into the trees with our GPS units and our bright orange vests thinking we are the masters of the wild. But we are just noisy, clumsy intruders in a kingdom that has its own rules and its own hunters. The mountain doesn't care about your maps. It doesn't care about your search grids. It knows where the holes are. It knows how to wait for the exact second you look away to tie your shoe or check your compass. There is a visceral horror in the idea of the unseen. We want to believe in the mountain lion because we know how to fight a lion. We want to believe the boy just got lost because we understand the tragedy of exposure. But we don't want to believe in the thing that can move through the forest without snapping a twig. We don't want to believe in the predator that can bypass a dozen bloodhounds without leaving a single molecule of scent. That is the monster under the bed. Except the bed is 1,000,000 acres of wilderness, and there is no door to lock. The case of Jaryd Atadero remains a closed file in the eyes of the law, but it is an open wound in the heart of the missing 41-1 investigation. It serves as a grim template for the hundreds of other children who have vanished under identical circumstances. The same high altitude, the same proximity to water or granite fields, the same silence, the same impossible recovery of clothing years later in areas that were previously searched. It is a serial phenomenon that spans continents and centuries. We are looking at a predator that has been hunting us since we first crawled out of the caves, and we are no closer to identifying it now than we were then. As I sit here, the shadows in the corner of my office seem to lengthen and deepen. I think about those hikers in 2003 standing on that high ridge looking down at those tiny sneakers. I wonder if they felt the same chill I feel now. I wonder if they looked up at the rocks above them and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes watching them from the cracks in the stone. The mountains are not empty. They are full of the things we refuse to see, because seeing them would mean admitting that we are not at the top of the food chain. We are left with the cold, hard facts that refuse to fit into a logical box. A 3-year-old boy disappears in seconds. The most sophisticated tracking equipment on the planet finds nothing. Years later, his clothes appear in a location he could never have reached in a condition that defies natural decay. One tooth. One piece of skull. A jacket turned inside out. These are the fragments of a nightmare that has no end. The woods are quiet tonight, but out there, in the dark heart of the Comanche peaks, the silence is hungry. The tragedy of Jaryd Atadero is mirrored with haunting precision in the disappearance of Dennis Martin in 1969. Dennis was 7 years old when he vanished during a game of hide-and-seek in the Great Smoky Mountains, disappearing behind a bush and never emerging despite a search effort that involved the Green Berets and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Witness reports of a hairy, slumped figure carrying something over its shoulder in the woods that day were dismissed, but the total lack of evidence left behind suggests a predatory force beyond conventional understanding. Similarly, we must look at the case of young Dior Kunz Jr., who vanished from a remote campsite in Idaho in 2015. Like Jaryd, the child was there one moment and gone the next, with no tracks, no blood, and no scent for the dogs to follow. Despite years of intensive searching and private investigations, not a single piece of clothing or biological evidence has ever been recovered from the rugged terrain. These cases form a terrifying mosaic of the unknown, suggesting that our wilderness areas harbor a presence that operates with a different set of physical laws, leaving us to wonder who will be the next to step into the green silence and never return. The files on my desk don't offer closure. They only offer more questions that lead into darker corners of the human experience. We keep going back into the woods because we have to, because we hope that one day we will find the key that unlocks the mystery. But until then, we are just wandering through the hunting grounds of a ghost. Watch your step. Stay with the group. And for God's sake, don't let the silence get too loud. The mountain is always listening. The mountain is always hungry. And the mountain never forgets a face.